Welcome back to Stribling's New York. I am your host, Rob Taub, here on 710 AM, WOR Radio, an iHeart Media company. I am here with the founder of Stribling, Elizabeth Libba Stribling. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm looking at your biography. You really you started this firm in 1980, and it's grown. You have offices on the Upper East Side, Chelsea, Tribeca, and now Brooklyn.
Well, Brooklyn's not only my new office, but my new home for 5 years. But I'm extremely proud of the growth of Stribling and extremely proud that we have many brokers who are with me even. I've got 5 brokers who I carry their license that were with me in 1980. And yet I have a new crop of youngsters coming along, too. And I like that balance.
So you grew up in New York City. You went to the Hewitt School.
I did indeed. My parents came from the South. I went down south every summer, and I think that dual upbringing, because the South was a really different place, and it showed me really that there's no one right way to look at the world, and I think that helped my negotiating talents a lot.
Well, I've always been fascinated with Brooklyn because it was just this foreign, exotic place. When I was a kid, we had cousins that lived on Ocean Parkway and Avenue J, and my mother's favorite restaurant was a place called Lundy's, which was this enormous seafood place. And
Lundy's isn't there right now, but
it's
Randazzo's still is. I went out to Sheepshead Bay recently, just on a really kind of a fun thing. And the seafood's still great out there. Actually, Stribling's doing a project there right now.
It's Sheepshead Bay?
Yes, we are.
Oh, well, tell me about it.
Well, I'm going to admit I haven't been out there yet, but both the project and Randazzo's is calling me.
It's what's fascinating to me about New York is how quickly we've caught up. We talk a lot on the show about change and how New York has just adapted so quickly. It's like one day there was no neighborhood somewhere, and now suddenly, downtown New York is built up, and Brooklyn is very much the same. I mean, once the butt of many jokes. Now, in fact, when the Brooklyn Bridge was first built, there's supposedly an apocryphal story. Somebody said all that trouble just to get to Brooklyn, and now it's a destination.
Well, I'll say this: when I bought out there, and I actually made my decision in 2007, signed in 2009, and I was thought to be a lunatic then. I'm thought to be a genius now, just 5 years later. But Rob, what I would like to say is, in the span of my career, the thing that has been the most really exciting to me and reassuring is the different neighborhoods that have come up. When I grew up, you either lived on the Upper East Side, or you lived on the West Side, or you lived in Brooklyn. But now, and you didn't cross those boundaries, as you said. It was foreign territory. But now you live on the East Side, you live on the West Side, you live downtown. Tribeca is morphed into Chinatown. Wall Street is becoming a completely different neighborhood, kind of like the Shanghai of New York, with residential and commercial, and Neiman Marcus is going in there, and all the Larry Silverstein doing 30 Park Place, and it's exciting. But Brooklyn's something really special, and maybe I just might add one anecdote, not
Please.
Really anecdote, but when I went to Brooklyn, it wasn't foreign to me. I had been a patron of the Brooklyn Academy of Music, BAM, for about 25 years, and so it wasn't foreign turf to me. I was comfortable going to Brooklyn. But when I walked a building for Robert Levine, RAL Industries, which became One Brooklyn Bridge Park, where I live, and I walked to the corner, and I looked out, and in front of me was the Statue of Liberty and all the buildings of downtown and the Brooklyn Bridge, and I thought, that's my New York. And where you see my New York is from my view in Brooklyn.
So was there a long gestation period, or did you have just an aha moment where you decided to move there?
Oh, Ron, it was a aha moment. I looked out the window. I'd been living in an 1882 townhouse, 4-story townhouse in the Upper East 80s near Gracie Square, a little crumbling after all those hundreds of years. And I looked out the window and I looked at Robert Levine and I said, I'd like to shake your hand. He said, oh, well, why? Because I thought in a nanosecond. I've done 3 projects with this man. I've gone to all his kids' weddings, and I qualify as friends and family. I'm going to get this corner for myself. And he said, why? I said, because I'm your first buyer. He said, you're kidding. I said, I'm not kidding. And I wasn't.
And how has the neighborhood changed since you've moved there?
Well, what's happened is certainly the Brooklyn Bridge Park, which we are overlooking, and which was part and parcel of this conversion of this building, has become more and more beautiful. Robert von Falkenberg is the landscape designer, and it is simply gorgeous and is so well maintained by the citizens of New York who flock there in the spring and summer. They've got sports fields, they've got outdoor barbecues. It's really quite spectacular. But the real difference that I've seen in this charming area of Brooklyn Heights is Atlantic Avenue. When I moved to Atlantic Avenue, and I love to cook, there's some marvelous, marvelous Middle Eastern pastry shops and nuts and foods and all sorts of things. And that was pretty much it. It was a lot of Middle Eastern food. Now, of course, Barney's is there. Barney's went to Brooklyn before it returned to 17th Street. And we have more and more upscale dress shops, very, very trendy clothes, and all the old-fashioned sort of second-hand furniture shops have morphed into extremely trendy 1950s design shops.
And where is the next hot section of Brooklyn where people are going to be moving and that's going to see development that hasn't yet?
Well, the real development, the massive development, is going to be in the Navy Yard and also in Sunset Park. The Navy Yard will be mixed use. A tech center is coming into some of those old Jehovah Witnesses buildings, which sprawl from Brooklyn Heights into Dumbo, and Sunset Park is going to have vast commercial development out there. The other thing that's going to happen in Brooklyn, and is already on the skyline as far as design, is Brooklyn is going to have the large skyscrapers in downtown Brooklyn that, of course, are populating all of Manhattan right now. And the Brooklyn skyline is going to become more like a New York Manhattan skyline.
Well, another thing I've noticed about Brooklyn, when you mention the Navy Yard, is that cruises are starting to do we embark on a cruise where so I would think that if they have passenger ships that are starting to launch their cruises out of there, that's going to be a huge economic boost to the area as well. And it just says a lot for change and development. And in Brooklyn itself, I was very wowed by that.
Well, that would be fun. I see the Carnival lines, a cruise in front of me on the other side of Governor's Island as they head down to the west side. And I must say, with all they're huge, of course, and with all their colorful graffiti, if we could call it that, of course it's art, I always wave to them from my terraces. I think it's kind of, people love to go someplace and come back, so I wave to them. From my terrace, I can look out toward the Verrazano Bridge and see the beautiful Marys, the Queen Mary, who was docked out there.
My father was a newspaper reporter in the 50s and used to go out on tugboats to meet the ships that were coming in. So it was a different era back then, and I kind of like the idea now that we're redeveloping our waterfronts, because I just think it's one of the things that makes a city great and interesting, even though we tend to travel more by air.
Well, the piers that are in front of Brooklyn Bridge Park and in front of my building, One Brooklyn Bridge Park, were originally cargo docks. And then the Port Authority took them over, and then the Port Authority moved, and they became part of the park. So that history's there, too.
Well, so now, aside from where you're living in Brooklyn, I was also curious about Red Hook. I've just been reading about it. I went to an IKEA there.
Well, yeah, the IKEA is huge out there, and in fact, they have their own little ferries from Manhattan out there.
So, what is the city keeping up with infrastructure-wise and services? I know that there's the one downside of Red Hook is there's no subway service there, but there are ferries.
Red Hook has not kept up with the momentum of pace of development of some areas, and I think that's probably one of the reasons. And I do not really. There's one school out in Red Hook. I'm not. Of course, a Whole Foods has just moved in, also close to Red Hook. So it's still Red Hook still got its, if we can call it, gritty charm. But what has really changed dramatically right now is the area called Prospect Heights and Clinton Hill. And they go on the other side of Fort Greene, and they have got very, very good, especially Clinton Hill, which is near Pratt, extraordinary brownstone architecture, as does Clinton Hill. And those are becoming more and more popular as people are being priced out of the other areas of
What
Brooklyn.
about standalone homes in Brooklyn?
Oh,
And
gosh.
Where do I find those?
Well, heavens. First of all, you've got to go to Dyker Heights. I don't know if you've ever been out there with all the Christmas tree lights at Christmas time. They have beautiful standalone homes, but the ones I simply adore are out in Ditmas Park. And you have these charming Victorian, really Hansel and Gretel type homes. And when I first was going out there, gosh, they hadn't hit the $1 million mark. And so let's say that was 2000. I mean, going out there in terms of settling in, 2007, 2009. Now they're approaching the 3 million, even some of those houses.
And how large are these homes?
I'm not too good on square footage, but let's say they're probably all about 3 to 4 bedroom homes with porches and kind of little swings on them and turrets and so on. And I would say off the top of my head, I would think they would probably be about 2,000, 2,500 maybe feet.
I think that's a neighborhood that Cary Grant lived in Arsenic and Old Lace.
You've got the image absolutely spot on.
I always loved that house when I was a kid and I first saw that movie, and I thought that everybody that lived in Brooklyn just lived like that. I wasn't that sophisticated. I was just from Staten Island, so.
Well, that was great. And also, of course, the Midwood area has some extremely expensive houses. I know the renowned French-born decorator Robert Couturier has just done a replica of the Petit Trianon with all period furniture. And when I saw it, I said, and he said it was in Brooklyn, I said, it's got to be there because, it's got all this land around it. It's a freestanding house and everything. Well, there it is, Le Petit Trianon in Brooklyn. Beautiful.
Now, we mentioned Sheepshead Bay, which amazingly, I remember taking my kids down there when they were younger so that they could see there were actual charter fishing boats going out, people catching fish and then coming home and cooking it in Brooklyn. And also Charles Oakley from the New York Knicks has his own car wash there. So my son wanted to see that way back when. But what's going to happen now with Coney Island and the development?
Oh, gosh.
there?
Coney Island's in for an enormous development in very good ways because the preservation community also is out there really surveying because, as you say, it has this enormous history. It's interesting because there are already some large apartment buildings toward the way beyond what we would call the former boardwalk area that are very popular, and a couple of large buildings have gone in there. But there is a whole Coney Island redevelopment plan that has been in formation for certainly the last 8 years, and I'm sure that will happen.
Well, one of the things I've always found really amazing, and I do this at least annually, is I get on the D train or I think it's the R or the N, and if you get on in Midtown and ride it all the way to the end and stand in the first car, the last stop is Coney Island, and you're looking at the Atlantic Ocean, and I just find something about that to be really amazing. You're in Midtown Manhattan surrounded by all these great buildings, and then 40 minutes later, you're looking at the Atlantic
I've got
Ocean.
a story for you.
Yes.
When I bought my home in the south of France, one of my mother's longtime friends, an advertising gentleman from the south, he said, I really thought about that. And when I saw your view and the fact that you could look out on the ocean, he said, I went out and I bought myself an apartment in Coney Island looking out on the ocean. And that's a true story.
Really? I could see myself in my, now in my dotage moving to a place like Coney Island because I've been in Manhattan for almost 40 years, and
Well, Rob, let's think about Miami and South Beach. Might be possible.
well, what can you tell me about that?
Well, good heavens, as we all know, the South Beach area of Miami has made this enormous, enormous revival. It's become extremely European as well as South American down there. And you've had all those fabulous Art Deco buildings, and they've all come back, and it's out there on the beach, and it's a huge renovation and an area that had been neglected for a long while. So perhaps as that particular beachfront has come back, maybe the Coney Island for New York can too.
So that there is a possibility there, and it's almost like what I've mentioned this on the show before. We were talking about Wall Street. I go back to all these old movies. There was a movie called The World, the Flesh and the Devil with Harry Belafonte, and it was supposed to be it was the end of the world, and there were only like 3 people left. So they shot it on Wall Street on the weekends because nobody was down there, and it looked like the end of the world. And now it's a bustling area. If you told somebody this in 1980, they probably would have wanted to commit you. And so I have my hopes for Coney Island, just because I just think it's striking how close it is to New York City, and we tend to forget about that.
Well, sometimes you can jest, and the joke proves true.
Now, I also wanted to discuss just a little bit about the Stribling Marketing and how you've adapted and changed the firm in that regard.
What happened originally from my Stribling residential brokerage in Chelsea, several of the brokers down there in the mid-1990s were doing small development work, converting buildings for developers. And after the third one of these, I suddenly realized I had a complete different business on my side. And what we do in that particular instance is we meet with the developer, we help decide on the floor plans, the finishes, the target market. We open a sales office, we sell out the building, and then we hand out the keys to all the happy buyers. Naturally, it's fraught with all sorts of ups and downs along the way. But I realized I had a separate office, and so really a separate firm, and it is a separate firm. And so in 1997, we incorporated that. We started with, again, work in Soho and Tribeca. Then we moved to different areas. In 2007, we did the transformation of the Plaza Hotel, $1.5 billion in sales. That was a big success and extremely exciting to be part of a landmark icon of New York and its transformation into condominium apartments. And, of course, they've left the hotel component part. Now we are doing a beautiful glass tower for Worldwide at 252 East 57th Street. We've got plans for 45 Park Place across from Larry Silverstein's Park Place downtown, South Tribeca, which again will be a glass tower in the sky. And yet we are doing some smaller projects such as 465 Pacific in the Boerum Hill area of Brooklyn. We're on the west side. I just met with some developers today with Kathy Taub.
I'm familiar with her.
I hope you are. She's one of Stribling's top brokers. And we toured the just closing 151 East 78th Street.
I had Peter Penoyer on the show.
Well, let me tell you,
guest.
Peter did a fabulous job, and it harkens back to the Candela Park Avenue ambiance. So what's so exciting for me, we're doing a building also on West 14th Street where Jacques Garcia, the well-known French designer, is going to be doing the finishes, is the variety of finish, conversion, ground-up construction, classic, very modern, different neighborhoods, and it just proves that today people will live anywhere in a great place.
Oh, if you were giving advice to somebody who's just out of school right now, where do you think a good place to land is if Manhattan's too expensive?
You can still go back to Manhattan in the upper East 80s and 90s, far east, and that will be a fabulous buy for the future as the 2nd Avenue subway is finishing, and a lot of developers are beginning to build extremely fancy condominiums there.
Will that change? I've always loved East End Avenue, and I think there are incredible apartments there that are just so grand and really wonderful. And
Absolutely. 10 Gracie, 120 East End, 1 East End Avenue, you're right spot on the money.
so how will that affect the prices in that neighborhood once the subway is actually completed?
I am hoping that they will go up for those buildings. Those buildings are like certain buildings on Sutton Place. They're probably 20% cheaper than their equivalent building in the mid-60s on Park Avenue or on Fifth Avenue. And yet at the same time, they give you the privacy of a real neighborhood. There are still today dry cleaners and shoe repair shops and tailors in that neighborhood. Those are hard to find now.
Yes, you can't find a shoe shine place. There used to be one every 2 blocks, or a locksmith and things like that. And I love the feeling of that It's a neighborhood.
It's a neighborhood, but I think with the transportation and also one thing that's coming in, Rob, you mentioned you're a young person. One of the reasons they don't like to live there now is there are no places to hang out and go for dinner. The restaurants are beginning to follow right now. That's the time of a change.
Well, this has been a fascinating talk. I'm really glad that you joined us today. I hope that
Well,
you'll come
I tell
back
you,
soon.
you're a good interviewer, and you really got the questions going.
It makes it easy when I have a knowledgeable guest. And one thing I did want to mention about that Peter talked about was on East End Avenue. I had read all of his books in preparation for the interview. When the FDR Drive was built, it covered up most of the people that lived there had docks, and they would take their boats to Wall Street.
Absolutely. 10 Gracie had a dock, 1 East End had a dock, but also there was a dock in Brooklyn, and there was a dock in Port Washington. And certainly the tycoons, the guys then, would come in from Port Washington, and they would come down. There was also one at the River House. So they'd come down the river, they'd sail down the river to their places of power.
Well, Robert Moses did not have a car and a driver, but he had a boat with a captain, and that ferried him around. And I think his office was somewhere under the Triborough Bridge, literally.
Well, our previous 2 mayors have wanted to make part of their legacy the greening of the waterfront in New York and the parks that go around. And I think that is very happily coming into fruition.
And also, I just did want to mention you're involved with Landmark Conservancy.
I'm on the board and the executive committee of the Landmarks Conservancy, and I like to follow the advice of the famous Brendan Gill, a very eloquent New Yorker who was on that board, and he said preservation should be a bridge from the past to the future.
Well, those are very wise words and well spoken. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.